My name is Damian Monticello. I'm SHFM's president-elect. On behalf of SHFM and the SHFM Diversity Council, I want to welcome you to the first installment of this series, Confronting Systemic Racism, Striving for Equity in Hospitality and Beyond. As everyone is still taking a few moments to join the session, there are a few things I would like to mention for the group. Please ask questions along the way and during the Q&A portion of today's session in the Q&A window, which you will find in your toolbar. Should you wish to remain anonymous when asking a question, please be sure to select the anonymous button before you hit submit. Also, this session is being recorded, so it can be played on demand. It will be available tomorrow on the SHFM website and YouTube channel. Today's SHFM educational programming was developed by your peers. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the Diversity Council and give a special thank you to the planning team for this session. Our Diversity Council Chair, Donna Ford with Sodexo Magic. Our Diversity Council Co-Chair, Becky Smith with Clark Food Service Equipment. SHFM Liaison, Victoria Vega with Unidyne Corporation. And Sumi DeBenedettis with PepsiCo. This series is designed to provide critical context on timely issues, including diversity and inclusion topics, to encourage frank, solution-focused dialogue. It's a difficult climate right now, and we're pleased to be joined by DNI leaders and SHFM members as we address how you can be part of the change on this journey for racial equality. We are all in the hospitality industry, and we are in the business of welcoming people. We see the whole person, and we also see each individual in the context from which we know them from SHFM and the industry. But what experiences are individuals having outside of our world and workplace that we may have no idea about or have never experienced ourselves? The reality of experiences in the real world outside of our bubble can and may be very different. So before we hear from today's special guest speaker, Gerri Mason Hall, I would like to introduce a longtime SHFM member who will share her own impactful story and experience that exemplifies the importance of why we're having this conversation today. Please welcome Shayla Martin.
Hello, everyone. So first, let me start with, this is hard for me to be this vulnerable and to share this story. A story of racism. Of course, as a Black woman, I have experienced blatant racism and microaggression racism my entire life, but perhaps I never thought I would experience it like this. At the beginning and the height of the protests in early June, New York City became intense. The cops were arresting protesters, sweeping up protesters, and the city implemented a curfew. But on this particular night, I was not a curfew. I was just a citizen walking home. On June 4th at 8:07 p.m., I was arrested walking home in Harlem, New York City, 9 blocks from my home, a traditionally people of color neighborhood. Earlier that day, I went to get a COVID test because I attended 2 protests. I took a run, and then I met with friends who walked with me towards the north part of the city where Harlem is. We walked through the Upper West Side neighborhood, and then we separated and went upon our own ways. I was walking from the Upper West Side of Manhattan to Harlem, and as I crossed the neighborhood lines towards Central Park, I recognized the guy from leading a protest group I saw at the previous evening's vigil. As I was walking, I paused to this person. I did not know him. I paused and I briefly spoke and just said, I saw you the day before. And he said, oh yes, I was out there. I've been supporting the protests and handing out supplies every day. I'll be here every day. I love you guys. Black Lives Matter. And as I turned to keep walking, I was ambushed from the side by multiple cops. 7, 8 cops grabbed me, restraining me with no warning. And as I tried to break free from these hands grabbing all over my body, I was told I was under arrest. They grabbed me like I was a criminal. My immediate words were, no, you have the wrong person. I didn't do anything. You don't know me, that I'm fine. I'm not part of the protest. There was a protest happening in the distance, but I'm not part of the protest. I'm just walking home. I had no idea what was happening. I felt so unprepared. And then as I was trying to explain and my arms are flailing because everyone's grabbing on me, I was told I was resisting arrest, and the cops grabbed me harder to hold me into place. I felt like a criminal, but I didn't do anything. They said, you're under arrest for breaking curfew. Me, in my running clothes, I said, I went for a run. I just walked with some friends. I'm almost home. My ID is I was wearing an armband. My ID is in my running armband. I'm 9 blocks from home. They didn't care. They kept tight grips on me, again, telling me I was resisting arrest. A woman cop then grabbed me to force my hands behind my back. And as I tried to jump away, I said, my arms can't go back that far. I had a mastectomy. She loosened her grip a little bit and told me that they had to take me to the precinct for a summons because I was out past 8 p.m. It was still maybe 8:20 at this point. Everything happened so fast. And I pleaded with her and I said, no, I am almost home. A summons does not warrant handcuffs in jail. I'm headed home. Please just check my ID. They wouldn't do that. I've never been so scared and unprepared. I honestly, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call. And as I finally looked around, I saw so many cop cars, vans and lights. It looked like it was a bank robbery scene or something crazy. I was handcuffed with the plastic restraints of my arms behind my back, and they placed me in a police van along with the gentleman I spoke to, a guy that was by him, and a delivery person who is technically categorized as an essential worker. He was arrested as well. But we all lived in Harlem. We were all in our neighborhood. Although they took my running armband, I did have on an Apple Watch. When they placed me in the police van, I promised, a voice said, Shayla, your watch, use your watch. And due to the looser handcuffs, I was able to use my watch to get a message to a friend that's a lobbyist and said, I've been arrested, I need help. She mobilized quickly on my behalf and read the urgency in this message that something is happening. We need to find Shayla. And she mobilized with a friend that's an activist. I was still taken to the precinct and I was handcuffed to a bench. And I was sat there again like a criminal. Around 10 p.m., a couple of hours later, the NYPD, they gave me a summons and they let me go. And they told me to walk home after arresting me for walking home. And now, the person that you guys all know and respect, I have a criminal court date, October 2nd. I have to go to criminal court and plead my innocence to get out of a summons for being out 15, 17 minutes past the curfew. My friends that I was with, that I was walking with after that run, my white friends who were walking home to the Upper West Side, out also past curfew, they didn't see one cop in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. No one stopped them. They weren't asked any questions. This experience has been emotionally tougher to process than getting the call to say, Shayla, you have breast cancer. This experience hurt my soul and my spirit because although I know that I'm a Black woman, I know that I've experienced racism, I've never experienced it like that, and that it hurts. So as I sit here vulnerable and reliving this moment with you all, because I want you to know my experience in the outside world, an experience I really never imagined happening. But how can we prevent this unfairness from happening in our workplace? And how can we help our fellow minority colleagues feel safe, valued, and seen, at least at work? And that's why this conversation is important. And that's why I'm sharing this story. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla. Your authenticity, your vulnerability, and your courage to share your story has deeply impacted me. And it's stories like yours and brave leaders like you that unite us. But you also challenged us, and I accept your challenge of what part can I play in the workplace and in the communities where I serve to help ensure that people like you and others are supported and that equity is realized. So again, thank you so very much. And I challenge everyone on this call today to have Shayla in your thoughts on October 2nd. We will be with you. I'm Donna Ford, and I am honored to serve as the chair for the SHFM D&I. And it's because of things like this and opportunities like this that this work is so meaningful, so impactful. I'm extremely pleased to introduce my colleague, Gerri Mason Hall, who's going to share more about how we can confront racism and strive for equity. Gerri leads Sodexo's inclusion, sustainability, and philanthropic work in the Americas, and we're so grateful to have her today to lead this conversation. Gerri also serves on the board for Sodexo Magic. Thank you so much for being with us today, Gerri, and I'll now hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate the introduction. And Shayla, I just got to tell you, I have to take a moment because that was so touching and powerful. And I see in the chat members applauding you for sharing that story, for being so courageous, because it is disturbing. And we talk about the emotional tax, which I'll take on a little later, but it's pervasive and you're representing that emotion. So thank you, first of all, for starting us off. I'm excited to be back here with SHFM community and to kick off this series with Conversations That Matter. I want to thank Damien and the ladies who are leading the D&I Council for inviting us back. And I got to give a shout out to my colleague, Krista Dungy, for her partnership with SHFM in helping to prepare and deliver us today. We've been at this work for quite some time. My background as an employment lawyer and years of work around D&I, I'm very familiar with these discussions around race. But in the last couple of months, since George Floyd's murder, it seems that I'm having these conversations daily. And the questions you see on the screen are those that I get asked most often. What is systemic racism? What is my role as a leader? What can I do differently? And how can my organization help make change? And so in the workplace, we may not see as profound and overt experiences as Shayla did, but we do have opportunities to do better. And I'll spend some time today addressing these areas. Systemic racism. If you look on the screen, you'll see that it is the comprehensive policies and practices entrenched in established institutions, which result in the exclusion or promotion of designated groups. And this is really embedded heavily in our history. I'm glad to see our friend Jerry Fernandez is on screen today because he addresses a lot of this at MFHA, and I know he'll be continuing to participate in workshops like we have today. So we know that despite the history of segregation and inhumane treatment of people of color that many thought were issues of the past, the realities rooted in our history of slavery are very alive today. And they remain pervasive in a wide range of areas and manifest in major parts of US society. And so when we think about education, for example, things like implicit bias studies that show Black and Latino students are consistently placed in lower reading groups before entering kindergarten. So well before you get to the workplace, you're already starting on an uneven playing field. Health disparities. Black and Hispanics continue to be the most uninsured groups, have higher rates of chronic health conditions, and receive preventative and mental health care services at half the rates of their white counterparts. And during this pandemic, we're really seeing the heightened disparities. And in the housing market, while formal discrimination for home loans has been illegal in the US for decades, Harvard Business Review and other studies show that redlining and other inappropriate practices still are in effect broadly. And so when we talk about these things, people are surprised. Well, there are laws that have changed that. Absolutely. But yet we see over and over again the need for lawsuits that challenge and address these practices, and they remain pervasive. So beyond society at large, we then come to our workforce. And it's important to note where these issues show up in our economy. There's no shortage of research on the impact of these racist systems in our labor market today. And I want to underscore, this is research-based. This isn't just Gerri's point of view. Excuse me. We can go to a host of studies. And for many people who ask me, well, how do I understand more? How do I understand the history of racism in this country better? And I will point out, we certainly don't have time for this in this one session, but the 1619 project that was started by New York Times Magazine last year is a great primer and a great starting point to understand how these things are woven in our systems. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that these disparities are perpetuated, that the highest paying jobs, categories like management, professionals, and related occupations, as you see on the screen, are held in great part far more by in the Asian community, even exceeding the white community. And then you see the disparities with the Black and Hispanics being on the lower end. Host of studies continue to show how this then leads to the wage gaps. And it's no surprise, especially that these staggering wage and wealth gaps are perpetuated. And in our industry, in the hospitality industry, where women of color are represented so highly, it's important to note the intersection between the wage and gender gaps. So now you consider all of these inequities throughout our society, touching every aspect of our lives. And then you think about what happened in February. So we're already living through all of this. And now here's this new virus that led to a global pandemic, which has further exposed the fault lines in our systems. COVID by the numbers. I'm sure you're familiar with many of these statistics, but new data from Johns Hopkins shows that Black and Latino patients are already at a higher risk of pre-existing health conditions and tend to receive less aggressive treatment than white patients. Medical professionals are also concerned about testing and COVID vaccines and the efficacy around people of color because they're gun shy and very leery of some of the trials. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the employment gap just continued to widen as people of color has been disproportionately affected by job loss. And we see it especially in our industry, the hospitality and food service area. Now, these lasting effects of system injustices we need to discuss what can we do about it. So as I mentioned this on the last time I was with the SHM community, we've been talking through the pandemic that we're all in this together. And I've been very proud of our industry, of how we've stepped up, how we've tried to support our front line, where many of our businesses are closed or furloughing people and the like, and we've tried to support one another in many ways. So while we're all in this together, we absolutely are experiencing it differently. And despite our efforts to support one another collectively, we realize same storm, but different boat. So with these systemic disparities, we know that we're all responsible for creating a more equitable future as we face whatever lies ahead, as we talk about this new normal and emerging from the crisis. But before we start exploring our individual identities and roles, I'd like you to take a quick poll with me. When you think about all the aspects of who you are, your gender identity, country of origin, family status, how central is race to your identity on a scale of 1 to 10? Julie's going to help us with the poll. And if you would, please choose from 1 to 10. This is a question that the Pew Research Center asks thousands of Americans each year. And we've been asking our leaders during dialogue sessions like this about race. And so as we look for our results, I wonder if you are familiar with the Pew research and what the outcomes that have been shown consistently. Julie? And so we see our results. And I can share with you that although we can't see, I would imagine that a lot of these percentages are consistent with the Pew research. And what the Pew research has found, we can close that up for everyone and go to on the next slide. We see that data shows year after year, there's a huge gap between whites and people of color as we examine the importance of race. And so while more often than not, for example, white women will identify their gender as being the most important part of their identity or their status as a mother. As you see on the screen, Blacks and Hispanics far outweigh and recognize their race and ethnicity as central to their identity. And so this may explain some of this discomfort because of these differences, this discomfort in talking about race and understanding some of the dynamics in the workplace. But just because we can't see something or have it doesn't appear to us, we can't not address it. So we can't simply not see something so important as it is to our peers' identity and what they're experiencing. A Catalyst report, and Catalyst is the organization that focuses, premier organization focusing on gender issues. They did a report recently and on the emotional tax for people of color in the workplace. And they revealed that over 50% of people of color are highly on guard, prepared to face discrimination and at risk for poor health because of the taxing and the fatigue from these issues. And so experiences like Shayla's that impacts them before they arrive at work then remains throughout their workday. And be it now where we're remote or on site, these things weigh heavily and affect the individual's productivity and again, put them at risk for well-being. But there are proven strategies that leaders like all of us here can use to help create a better experience for everyone. So when we focus on, we cannot change the world around us. We absolutely can be change agents and contribute to the change that we want to see in the world, but we absolutely can have an impact on those that we lead and with whom we interact. And so first and foremost, to be an inclusive leader, we have to look inward. We have to think about our emotional intelligence and increase our self-awareness. Before we act courageously, we need to understand who we are. And all of us, including people of color like myself, we all have unconscious biases, and we need to check those. And this is what I call 101 work. The foundation of any work around inclusion is to be cognizant of your own biases. Understand how to use privilege. Authentically sharing your stories, much like Shayla did. So when you understand your own biases, you understand your own stance, how you're arriving in the workplace, then you're able to authentically share. And fess up. I will share with you, I don't have all the answers, and I'm looking for them. And I know that I have blind spots as well. And I'm constantly challenging myself to think about my blind spots and how it affects my actions. Cultural intelligence. Once we get a handle on looking inward, then we can look outward to understand and support and guide others, seeking to understand others' experiences. Again, I applaud the Inclusion Council and SHFM for inviting Shayla to tell her story so we can all have a better appreciation. I had a similar experience with one of our executives and talked about the fact that everyone loves Steve in the organization, and we see him in his suit and, clean-cut leader. But once Steve goes for his run and puts on his hoodie, he's just another Black man running in the streets, and so very vulnerable. And as he shares that story, much like Shayla, his team members are really taken aback and surprised that they never thought about that. Adapt to meet the unique needs of your team members. We are not all monolithic, because even with people of color, so we have different needs and different issues and different experience, and seek to understand. And then thirdly, speak up when you see injustice. The inclusive leaders proactively seek to understand these experiences of others and where there's opportunity to engage and address. And so together, if you look inward and outwardly, you can help create an inclusive culture where there is psychological safety, where team members are valued and respected, and in turn, they're inspired and confident and ready to contribute and do their best for the organization. So that's how we can show up. And so then the third question that I'm frequently asked is, what can organizations do to dismantle systemic injustice? And on the next slide, you'll see some of the examples that we focus on. And so first, we must evaluate our organizational systems and practices for inequity. Most of our systems default in favor of privileged groups, so we have to proactively address these various efforts. I had a conversation with one of my peers who said, well, Gerri, I just look for the best talent. I don't look at race, gender, any of the above, white, female. And I reminded her that part of the reason that she is a senior executive now is because in my role as the head of HR, I actively sought out and told the search firm that I wanted a slate saturated with women, not just one, but saturated. And so we knew that in order to ensure that we had still highly talented, highly qualified, we had to affirmatively be inclusive. And so there are opportunities to look throughout your organization. What kind of practices do you engage in to ensure that opportunities are available? As we elevate these conversations, equitable policies will become the norm, as those who don't respond will not be able to attract great talent. And I know you all understand this, because especially as we're engaging more and more newer talents, those who are in university right now, they're speaking loud and clear. At Sodexo, part of our business is with universities, and we hear first and foremost from those students that they are not going to stand, excuse me, for neutrality. They are absolutely looking for organizations that are responsive to the community and the challenges, and that are being change agents for the world. And the second way that you can show up and organizations can, again, be change agents is to engage in your communities. And we talk about supplier diversity and helping to support and engage small and diverse businesses. Those are great examples. And for example, as well, I call out census and voter education. That's the connection. Where can you be counted? Encouraging, we're focused heavily on encouraging our employees to participate in the census, because we know that's one of the ways you get counted, that their communities will be better served if they're counted on issues around healthcare, education, access to services. All of those are driven through the census. Similarly, if you're satisfied with status quo, then you vote in that direction. If you want change in your community, you need to be educated on what does the mayor stand for, who appoints the police chief. All of these things are with engagement in the community, and we have opportunity to further that. And of course, organizations that are directly affecting the communities, as excuse me, Donna mentioned, I lead our philanthropic efforts at Sodexo, and so our foundation to stop hunger, we focus on the needs of community and food insecurity. So there are more opportunities to address these disparities that are very much tied to race in our respective communities. So these are some of the baseline opportunities that we can share, that I work on every day in order to address systemic racism. And on the next slide, I will say here in closing that we have to confront systemic racism by leading inclusively and engaging our community. And even if we can't do every one of those things that I cited as examples, and we choose to do others, taking action is the most important opportunity we have, because inaction may be the biggest form of action. So I'll end you with, how will you take a stand for justice and equity? Being silent and neutral is, again, no longer an option. And we're hearing that loud and clear from our new generations of talents that are coming out of school right now. So remember that inaction may be, in fact, your biggest form of action. And with that, I'll pass it over to Victoria to start our Q&A.
I'm absolutely speechless from the presentation of both of you ladies, but let me start first, Gerri, by thanking you for this very impactful presentation. I know that we all feel really awakened by not only your explanations of bias, but motivated by your call to action, not to just stand up and use our voices, but to address and dismantle the now seen but usually unspoken ripple effects of racism and hate. Racism is something that manifests from your history and prejudices through your ignorance and avoidance of confronting the true impacts of discrimination. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Victoria Vega, and I'm a past president of SHFM. One of the things that stuck out to me prior to my term was the study by the McKinsey Institute on women in the workplace. And that revealed that white men comprise 67% of C-suite roles in corporate America. Men of color, 12%, white women, 18%, and women of color, 3%. Statistics do not even capture the true impact of our LGBTQ community and buckets all women of color into one single number. My major platform of my year was launching this SHFM Diversity Council, and our role as culture carriers is more important now than it's ever been. We've got quite a few questions that have come through the line. So Gerri, if you're ready, let's kick off.
I am. And Victoria, if I could just jump right in, there was one I really want to call out in the chat, and that is the question around not mentioning the LGBTQ plus community. And I want to be very clear that we weren't trying to boil the ocean today, and that there's a series of discussions, but absolutely we need to recognize and acknowledge indigenous communities, as well as the LGBTQ plus, as well as people of different abilities. And I do address that throughout my work as well. So I do want to acknowledge, but in today's conversation, it was the first of the series around race and what we're dealing with Black lives right now. And so this often comes up, and it has come up in the last couple of months, especially in my work. And it was the very same, it goes to the point of, well, don't all lives matter? And absolutely all lives matter. All disparaged groups matter. But in this moment, because of the unique experiences of the murders in the Black community, that's why we're calling out this conversation. But equal issues around the LGBTQ plus experience. And I just got to give a quick example. We at Sodexo, we really use our EBRGs, our employee business resource groups, to educate and drive many of these issues. And I sponsor our Pride team, and I was so very proud of them that, on June 1st, we were about to launch Pride Month. And they said, you know what? We don't think today is the right day to launch the celebration given George Floyd. So they reached out to ALF, the African American group, and said, let's partner and put out a joint statement. And I was just so very proud of that sensitivity and recognizing the intersections on many of these issues. So back to you, Victoria.
Perfect answer. Thank you, Gerri. We've got some questions that are a little bit all over the place. So one of the ones that I'm going to kick on first is, a lot of our folks want to use their voice and don't know how they can leverage themselves within their own organizations. How do you engage your CEO and other key executives in the true hard work that needs to be done for diversity and equity, given all the competing business priorities right now as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a tricky question. You have to know your culture and you have to meet people where they are. All of us, I mean, at the end of the day, we are a for-profit business. So we have to figure out how do we ensure that our businesses thrive. And so for us, it worked because we had multiple levers in our strategy around D&I. So we take the top down and the bottom up. So while top leadership is focused on, okay, how do we adjust this business with schools closing? How do we continue to feed students, even though they're not coming into the classroom? Issues like that. That's where we engage some of our grassroots teams like the EBRGs to stay engaged, to utilize those resources and redeploy. But again, each culture is a little different. And so it depends on how you're structured, what you can kind of glom onto. But yes, we have to integrate into this business crisis right now, and ensure that we have a business running where we can address and advance these issues.
Great, thank you, Gerri. And I know that we've got some questions coming in, but for those of you that do have questions, please continue to ask them by using the Q&A window on the bottom of your toolbar, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Gerri, let's talk a little bit, what role should business resource groups play in creating equity across organizations?
Yeah, so for us, again, that was a little bit I touched on, that they are the arm for both educating and sharing stories, like Shayla. So we have had these opportunities where we use our ALF, again, it's our African American Leadership Forum. We have used them to share their voices, to share those experiences and help educate others and help understand the fatigue that they're experiencing and many of these other issues that I just spoke to. And then similarly, engaging in the communities. Our volunteerism, with our large number of employees, we're able to mobilize and really focus on volunteering and having a positive impact in our communities.
Let's flip from what we can do as leaders, Gerri, to what we can do to lift people up. What types of programs should we offer people of color to help them advance in their careers?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm a firm believer, it's been around for quite some time, mentoring and developmental opportunities to ensure that there is this leveling of the playing field within the organization. So as we bring in new talents, especially, one of the things that we make sure, do you have a peer mentor who can help you navigate? Because there's always a culture within the culture. And there are some of these silent issues that people of color often don't benefit from. So having mentoring, solid mentoring programs and sponsorship programs to advance them. And then too, I think the absolute focus on representation. And do you have diversity among your leadership team? It's now being challenged where people are actually looking at the numbers on boards, just like, when with the launch of Me Too, everyone started thinking, well, can I add a woman to my board? Now we're really starting to look at top leadership and representation. So I think those are a couple of the key areas.
Excellent. Let's go back to the poll that you kicked off at the beginning of today's conversation. So one of the questions is, Might a white person saying that race is central to their identity be deemed privilege? Because it seems very complex to people when we just talk about how we identify with our own races, let alone other races.
It could be, but as noted in the question, that's very complex. So it depends on what the intent is behind that answer. When the Pew Research, the basis for that was really about understanding that for many non-whites, you know, you don't have a choice. You walk out of your door every day and you don't have a choice but to be seen as a Black person, and all that that entails. And so with that, then it's weighing on you constantly. But because as a white person, you don't necessarily have those issues. And the whole notion of privilege is not to be confused with, oh, you grew up with a silver platter or a silver spoon in your mouth. Not at all. But you have the privilege of not being targeted for running while Black. These are the issues that are pervasive in other communities, and the privilege of not having to think about those things and think about your race day in and day out is what that question goes to. But it is a complicated issue, don't get me wrong, and we don't, and that's why, you know, you have more than one conversation and engaging in more education. But this is absolutely a starting point, and I applaud SHFM for taking this on, and you, Victoria, for kicking off the council. So thank you.
Well, let's hit on the 3 H's that you presented in the discussion: the impact of history, health, and housing. One of the groups missing from that equation are working moms and single moms. What can we do to help ensure that working moms have the ability to juggle their responsibilities between career and parenthood, separate from our mantra of work-life balance?
Yeah, so I'm not a big believer in balance. I think that there is navigating both, that you can do both, but that you really can't balance. You're either at some point leaning a little more heavily on family and leaning a little heavily in the work. But I think as far as employers and leaders within the workplace, I think the whole notion of flexibility needs to be expanded. In many companies, including mine, you know, we've been driving flexibility for some time, and yet many of our leaders, you know, were absolutely opposed to remote working. And so they had to adopt it the hard way in this pandemic. So we've seen, you know, that you can be flexible and be hugely productive. But in this same time period, we're seeing that impact on moms. And even in where they're not the single mom, in two-family households, where two-parent households, where de facto mom is carrying the burden of the homeschooling and all of these things. Studies are showing it. We're getting those reports from Catalyst and McKinsey and the like. And so efforts absolutely need to be made to hear the voice of those employees and what are their needs, what can be realistically adjusted, what flexibility, what support systems can be engaged, what offerings through the benefits could be more supportive. Those are the type of things that could help.
So we're going to come short on time, but Gerri, let's quickly see if we can go from the macro to the micro. Can you give some additional specific examples of how the system has to change to undo racism?
Wow. So that is very loaded. So to undo racism in the broader society is an ongoing complex with people far smarter than me still arguing about what will undo it. But I will say in the workplace, we absolutely have to look at our policies and practices and assess them against, are they neutral even? Because that's where we've rested to say we are non-discriminatory, but we need to actively look at, are we anti-discriminatory? And so looking at each and every one of our practices. And so, for example, as I said, using in hiring. And so the Rooney Rule, the one person on a slate, does not work. Studies have shown that. And so you must saturate a slate if you want to achieve diversity. So each step of the way, looking at all of your policies and practices, and we're still doing it. We've made a lot of progress, but we are far from perfect, and the work does not end. So for us, we say every day, inclusion never stops. So the work must continue to challenge ourselves, but looking at every one of your policies and practices to see, again, not just that they're non-discriminatory, but are they inclusive? Are you building an inclusive culture through inclusive leaders?
And I'm going to bucket the last question. It's a few of these, but taking everything to the micro level, what advice do you have for Black leaders that have white managers that believe they're not racist but make offensive statements? And how can we direct people of color to have mentors that align to them both culturally and within similar race groups?
Okay, I want to kind of break those up. So the first one was Black leaders having white managers. So
That believe that they are not racist, but may make offensive statements.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they mean managers as subordinates or management above them. But in either case, I know, so this goes full circle to putting the burden on the individual, but speaking up and calling it. There's the old approach to ouch and educate. Do you realize, I know that the difference between your intent and your impact. So you think that you're not offensive, you think that you are neutral, but that is not enough. And this is why the words that come from you are offensive. And this is why, how I want to help you understand why they're offensive. And so for me, speaking up first and foremost. And then of course, again, I do have to acknowledge that there's the culture within the culture. So in any organization, that might not be so comfortable if that person, you're reporting to, and you have to leverage the resources within your organization to assist you with that. But for me, the direct approach is the best. And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry?
Was how valuable is it for people of color to have mentors from similar race groups and similar cultural backgrounds?
So I advocate for both, because having a mentor who has an appreciation similar to you with your experiences, having an appreciation for what you're dealing with, can be very nurturing and supportive. The flip side of that is I also encourage having mentors very different from you. And so, I've had white male mentors who I've learned greatly from. And so being able to have different points of views and sharing those experiences and understanding my view and their view, and being able to help me navigate the broader organization. So I advocate for both.
Well, thank you. And we've got about 2 minutes left. So I'd like to thank Shayla again for her strength and vulnerability of sharing her unjust story. And if this organization can write a petition, but we've recorded today's session, and I would bring that as evidence as well. And Gerri, thank you for being so upfront and making this conversation truly matter on all levels, with key takeaways that everybody on this call can deploy in their personal and professional vantage point. Following today's event, you will receive a conference evaluation via email. Please take a couple of minutes to complete this very important survey. Before we sign off, I do want to remind everybody about the upcoming Conversations That Matter sessions. Clearly, we could keep talking today, and Gerri can keep telling us more ways that we can make impact within our organization. So this is such a conversation that we need to continue. We will continue to provide critical context on timely issues, including diversity and inclusion topics. And if you haven't already, on your screen you will see information on our next 2 installments of Conversations That Matter. Please join us a week from today with our second session, Advancing Cultural Intelligence Within Our Industry. That will be Thursday, August 27th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And save the date for Thursday, September 24th, when we will see you again for our next Conversations That Matter. Thanks again, and get working towards diversity and inclusion. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.